Today we're going to talk about total utility. So, what is utility? When you think about things that you want, goods, or services that you desire, you get some utility from the consumption of those goods and services. Utility reflects that by consuming that good or service, you achieve a bit of that desire. So, you satisfy a bit of your desire through consumption of a good or service. Utility is measured in something that we call utils in economics or microeconomics. A util is just an abstract idea. A util is not really something that can be quantified in the real world or measured in the real world. But you know that when you consume something that you want, you definitely get some satisfaction from that consumption. But yeah, we have no perfect way of measuring or quantifying utility, the utility that one gets from consumption. And in fact, we really have no good way of measuring the amount of utility you get from something at all. Utility, we definitely know it exists, but we can't quantify it. However, we can measure utility ordinally. So by the word ordinally, it means that we can rank goods and services by the utility derived from it. So, how do we measure utility ordinally? When we prefer one good or service combination over another, then we assume that combination when you prefer more delivers a higher utility. There's a higher utility associated with it. So say that you are given the choice between an apple or an orange, and that you prefer the apple even though we don't know how many utils you get from the apple or how many you get from the orange. So we can quantify utility. We can know because of ranking of preferences that we conclude that you can get more utility from the apple, your top preference, over the orange. So we rank the apple above the orange. The apple has the higher utility. Utility theory helps us think about how consumers make economic decisions as they seek to maximize utility given its constraints.
Let's go with total utility. Total utility is the amount of utility that one gets from consuming some basket of goods and services. One important concept that's going to help us make sense of consumer preferences is the law of diminishing marginal utility. What is the law of diminishing marginal utility? One assumption that generally holds about utility and consumption and consumer preferences is that as you consume more and more of a good, the extra utility you get from each additional unit of consumption decreases. For example, you have a basket of apples sitting in front of you. You have like dozens of apples. The first apple that you eat consists some positive utility. The second apple you eat, it's good too. Your utility has gone up with the second apple, but utility hasn't got up additionally quite as much as the first. So the extra utility from the second apple is less than the first apple. If you add apple after apple, extra utility is less and less. You can imagine at some point, the 12 apples that you have, you're gonna get actually pretty close to zero or negative marginal utility.
Marginal utility is the extra utility you get from the next unit of consumption. Here is the equation for marginal utility. Marginal utility is equal to change in total utility divided by change in consumption. We'll go over a quick example here. On the first column, we have the quantity of apples, so we're consuming these apples. Here you have 0 apples consumed, 1 apple consumed, 2 apples consumed, 3 apples consumed. Then, on the second column, we have the total utility associated with each quantity of apples. If this person consumed 0 apples, 0 utility. If this person consumed 1 apple, he gets 5 units of utility. If this person consumed 2 apples, he gets 9 units of utility. And let's go through the schedule of utility calculating marginal utility all the way. Going from 0 apples to 1 apple, total utility changes from 0 to 5. So the marginal utility, 0 from the first apple, is 5 utils. Going from 1 apple to 2 apples, total utility went from 5 utils to 9 utils. So the marginal utility is 4, because the difference between 9 and 5 is 4. Now, going from 2 apples to 3 apples, total utility goes from 9 to 12. Marginal utility, the difference between the two, is 3 utils. Up to the fourth apple, total utility is 13. Going from the third to the fourth apple, total utility increased only by 1 util. Marginal utility is 1. One thing that you notice here is that as each apple is consumed, total utility is increasing. You know you're continuing to get positive utility, however marginal utility is decreasing. So this is the law of diminishing marginal utility that we were referring to that generally holds. Then we can see at some point, the sixth apple total utility went from 13 utils down to 12 utils. There's something about the sixth apple that's making this person worse off. Marginal utility is -1. The total utility is going down. The person shouldn't have eaten the sixth apple because the total utility didn't go up, it went down. By the eighth apple, the total utility is now down to 7. In fact, it's less than had they only consumed 2 apples. And then the marginal utility going from 7 to 8 apple is the difference between 10 and 7. Marginal utility is -3.
The next thing we want to do is to chart out utility and marginal utility. Along the vertical axis, here we have total utility. And then along the horizontal axis, we have quantity of apples. As you could see, at the first apple, they had 5 utils. Second apple, they had a total of 9 utils. Third apple, they got 12. Fourth apple, 13 utils. Fifth apple, they still had 13 utils. And then utility starts decreasing. So this area is our diminishing marginal utility area. Next chart is the marginal utility. Along the horizontal axis, we have quantity of apples, and then along the vertical axis, we have marginal utility. Going from the 0 apples to 1 apple, the marginal utility was 5. It increased. Going from the first to the second apple was 4. Second to the third apple, 3. The third to the fourth apple, there's only 1. And after that, we have diminishing marginal utility.